Healthcare.
Welcome, Matthew. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to have this conversation because Cyprus is something like is a place that I know basically because a lot of Belgians love to go on vacation in Cyprus. But lately, or the last few years, every actual news I got from Cyprus was kind of scary and alarming, and not at all what you would expect from a vacation hotspot, but more from a military outpost. So I'm very excited to finally be able to ask someone from Cyprus what is going on in Cyprus. Can you introduce yourself and tell us more about Cyprus and its political history and geographical location?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Matthew, based in Cyprus. I'm part of the collective Genocide Free Cyprus, GFC, and we're also involved with the global movement to Gaza Cyprus delegation, trying to basically break the siege on Gaza and let the flow of humanitarian aid to Palestinians who are in desperate need. Um, and we've been doing a lot of work kind of online through social media in terms of research, reporting, political analysis, but also organizing on the ground in terms of campaigning, educational events, or protests, along with many other local groups who have been active in the Palestine movement on the ground. So it's great to be here to discuss things with you. Cyprus is, yeah, kind of like you said, has become a military outpost. It has been that for quite a few years now, unfortunately, but now it's becoming ever more so to satisfy NATO, US, UK, Israeli military agendas, which for us is not only putting us in danger, but also directly implicates us in the oppression, the genocide, the apartheid of Palestinians, and also the oppression of many more in the region. So great to be here to discuss things with you.
You're very welcome. So why, like, what, like, can you take us back maybe? So, like, I know people don't like a history lesson, but this is so wild. We need to discuss everything that happened. So I'm going to give you the floor. Walk us through it.
Yeah, so I'll kind of give a Cyprus History 101, try and keep things short,
Yeah.
short and sweet. Um, because Cyprus is basically at the epicenter of these huge lands of mass, either on the eastern part of Europe, so just to the north of the island is what's now Turkey. To the east, you have Western Asia, which is now Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, and to the south, you have Egypt, so the northern part of Africa. So because it was situated at this crossroads of these vast lands, um, colonizers throughout history have basically taken advantage of the island as, well, not necessarily a launch pad, but as a logistical base to access these different continents in the region. So the name Cyprus or Kypros comes from copper, which we had a lot of once in the past, which the colonizers, like usual, took away from us.
Classic
So
move.
that's where the name comes from. Yeah. Um, Now, there are two main ethnic communities in terms of religious groups on the island, the Christians and Muslim. But throughout history, the island has been a multi-ethnic group because there was a lot of migration from these different continents to and from the island. So that's why Cyprus was kind of a blend of different societies in the region that eventually kind of grew up as what we uh, know that we are today as Cypriots, coming from Cyprus. Um, Now, it was under Ottoman rule for roughly 300 years until the British basically got Cyprus as a reward when the Ottoman Empire was defeated. So Cyprus then became part of Britain as a British colony. During that time, unfortunately, there was a large number of massacres, slaughters. There was, much like in many other British colonies, there was a lot of violence against the local communities. Cyprus was a very important geostrategic location because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. And there was also a lot of what colonizers usually do, which is to divide and conquer. So a lot of the communities on the island were slowly, gradually categorized into either being called Turkish or being called Greek, depending on whether they were Muslim or Christian. And this was one of the ways that, starting from the British, they would start to separate the two communities.
What is actually the logic? Like, maybe you don't know, but like you're not the British Empire, of course, but like, why like precisely Turkey? They could have perhaps pretended it was part of another country.
So the main languages and religions on the island is Christianity and Muslim, and it's Greek and Turkish. Those are national languages. Now, historically, we've always had a Cypriot dialect. So even the Turkish that people hear in Cyprus has a Cypriot dialect. And the Greek that we speak is using the Cypriot dialect. So a lot of words in Turkish and Greek that we use in Cyprus is kind of interchangeable in both languages. So it's not like there's no connection to Turkey and Greece in terms of the two communities on the island, but it's not what defines the people on the island. A lot of people were essentially we were part of the Levant. So even communities from the regions of Lebanon, Syria, um, Palestine as well, they would kind of come and go to and from the island, including Turkey, which is just north of it, and Egypt in the south. In the past, when people were sailing to either find refuge or just to find a new life, sometimes they would end up in Cyprus. So over history, it's kind of been a mixing of these different communities from these larger continents. But because the main languages spoken were Turkish and Greek, they were basically it made more sense to the British at least to separate them as Turkish and Greek because they could relate the religion and the language
Yeah.
to each of the places there, and that caused a lot of tensions within the community afterwards.
And so going from there, then, so they separated communities. What happens after?
Yeah, so during the British occupation, we had a resistant faction rising, the EOKA movement. Now, they weren't a resistant group in the sense of that their demand was for independence. They were problematic in the sense is that they were mainly led by the Christian majority group on the island, and they were demanding enosis with Greek, which is basically to be integrated as a part of Greece. The Turkish Cypriot community, for obvious reasons, um, didn't want that. They wanted to be separated, not as a British colony, but neither as a part of Greece. So even from there, there was tensions being built within the two communities because of the demands that were being made. And all of these, again, were influenced by British propaganda of trying to categorize Cypriots into these two different categories, being Greek or Cypriot. Um, so after the EOKA movement fought for the end of the British colonial rule in 1960, Cyprus finally gained independence in a sense because the British still maintained two parts of the island, which are now known as the sovereign base areas. So that's Akrotiri and Degelia. And these, including some other points on the island, like the Troodos Mountains, have been used until today as British military bases in order to enhance their surveillance, monitoring, and even direct lethal operations in the region. Um, and so from gaining our so-called independence while still having British colonies on the island, there was a building up of tensions between the Turkish Cypriot community and Greek Cypriot community because the far right Greek Cypriot community, along with the fascist Greek junta were basically carrying out massacres of Turkish Cypriot communities across the island. And over the years, um, tensions were rising even more. It's interesting because the CIA at the time knew that a coup was in the makings, essentially.
Hmm.
Kissinger knew this, but they decided to not only avoid it, but they even downplayed the severity of the coup. So the Greek junta, who were funded by the CIA, because at the time they were funding various anti-communist factions across Europe in order to battle against the Soviet Union at the time,
Hmm.
it was in their interest as well to fund the Greek junta, which subsequently aided in the slaughter of Turkish Cypriot communities. Um, so,
That's terrible.
unfortunately, the tensions right from that. Yeah, it's there was a horrible, horrible instances of mass graves as well. So it's a lot of pain on both sides of the community. But in 1974, the um, Eoka Vita movement, which was the far right fascist Cypriot movement on the island, along with the Greek junta funded by the CIA, staged a coup and overthrew the government. And in less than a week, basically, Turkey used this as a justification to illegally invade the northern part of the island in order to protect the Turkish Cypriot community.
So,
Now, Turkey has their own in as well, but that's the justification that they used in order to safeguard the community there from the Greek Cypriot fascists.
yeah. Okay, so Turkey invades, and what is the situation? What happens then?
Yeah. So since the illegal invasion of Turkey, you had the splitting of the two communities, Turkish Cypriots in the north and the Greek Cypriots in the south. So both communities were displaced from their land and forced to be separated. Now, the what's interesting is that the Green Line, which is now, the UN buffer zone that separates the island, was actually drawn out on the map before, with the British and the US and the Cypriot, some Cypriot military officials knowing about this beforehand. So, in a sense, all of it was planned beforehand, and there was a lot of internal movements that basically just aided in the separation, because it's essentially to their best interest to instigate the hate between the two communities so they can exert their own military agenda. So since then, you have the Republic of Cyprus, which is the recognized state of Cyprus on the southern part of the island, which is the Greek Cypriot community. There, for years now, have been pushing the propaganda against Turkey. And this has come, unfortunately, mainly to the expense of the Turkish Cypriot community, because while they're, were safeguarded by Turkey, that's their justification for the invasion, because they're illegally occupied land that they live on, internationally speaking, they're also subject to a lot of sanctions and have limitations in their daily life. So there's a huge disparity as well between the living conditions of the two communities. Um, and
I
since
didn't
then, there's
know
basically,
that part. That's
yeah,
so on top of everything else, there's also actual. They're treated differently. Like they have different advantages, disadvantages. Okay, that's
yes.
crazy.
So it's yeah, because I mean, it's technically illegally occupied land,
Hmm.
which, of course, because Turkey illegally invaded, but there's still Turkish Cypriots who have lived in Cyprus for, you know, they're Cypriots at the end of the day, but they're limited to what resources they can access because they're classified as illegally occupied land. Um, and you had propaganda from both sides pushing um, a lot of separation. So from the Republic of Cyprus, you have the hatred against Turkey because of the invasion, And from Turkey's side, you have the slaughter of Turkish Cypriot communities to propagate more hate and to basically, I mean, this came afterwards, but then Turkey's agenda became to pushing the independence of the northern part of the island. Um, Thankfully, in a recent election that the Turkish Cypriot community voted for, the candidate that was voted was pro reunification of the island. So at least this was an indication that um, the local community there on the ground it breaks from Turkey's messaging and signaling of wanting an independent state in the north. What's in best interest for both Cypriot, for all Cypriots, is the reunification of the island.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, these NATO powers they don't benefit from that if we reunify because they'll be limited in what they can do militarily.
Yeah, they function best in pure chaos. So anything going towards chaos is better for them. Anything going towards independence, sovereignty, and actual government structures doesn't really fit them very well. But it's crazy. And how does this all translate in daily life? Because, yeah, like a regular Cypriot, if I have a cousin that is living on the Turkish side, um, like that's which would probably happen. Uh, like how do you even cross the because like what is dividing exactly? Like how should I see the border then? Can you easily import stuff from Europe to Cyprus to cover the sanction stuff because the other side of the island is not under sanction? Can I have my uncle order? Like how do does that
Yeah,
work?
I mean the practical like living in the north, you have those limitations. So, for example, I mean, Amazon is a horrible company. We all agree on that. But an example is that you wouldn't be able to order from Amazon because the address is in illegally occupied territory. Um, there are also a lot of other things in terms of the natural resources of the island, like water, electricity, and all that stuff that it's kind of complicated. Um, but now, after the borders were opened and people could come and go, you do have a lot of interaction. So there were a lot of people waiting for years for the crossings to open in order to see their friends and loved ones from the Greek Cypriot or Turkish Cypriot community. Um, Now, in terms of trade, they do trade certain things. Now, the northern part of the island doesn't trade internationally because of the reasons we mentioned, but their main partner is essentially Turkey because their products are from Turkey if they're not produced there, mainly.
Yeah.
So there are those like physical, like practical problems with the occupation, mainly against the Turkish Cypriot communities, which are more disadvantaged in this scenario. Um, but yeah, it's, I mean, even in our side of the island, it's on the southern side, the non-occupied, it's still a problem in terms of now we're in a situation where the right-wing government has sold out so many parts of the island to so many people that the cost of living has ballooned and it's becoming almost impossible to live in Cyprus as a Cypriot, unfortunately, because they're attracting international investors and people who can bring money into the country. But what's left for Cypriots is barely anything.
We kind of discussed it in the beginning, or not really discussed it, we mentioned it. The Zionist influence in Cyprus and the fact that like there's a lot of Israelis buying up land, but it's not just Israelis, of course. It's like businessmen from Russia, from U.S., from Europe. They all want a little piece of Cyprus. How much does an apartment cost, for example? Like how much are you like if you compare like the wages against the rent, how does that work?
Uh, I mean, I'll just say that in Limassol, the prices to rent is becoming basically the same as London.
What?
Yeah.
So we're
I
talking
think because
2000? No.
yeah, so It depends on the apartment. If it's a two-bedroom apartment, then it might go like 2000 something if it's a decent size or whatever. But um, if you're lucky and you can get something for less than 1,000, it's definitely not going to be in a. It's not going to be a center, and it's not going to be in a good what's
Neighborhood.
it called? You know, it's yeah,
It's not
it's going to be
prime.
in a
It's
poor
not.
condition.
Yeah. It's yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's not prime real
and
estate.
all of this has to do with this foreign investment, and it so this was an issue before the Israeli influx, the Zionist influx on the island. Before this, we had the issue with basically rich oligarchs, Ukrainian, Russian, and even from Arab countries who were like had a lot of money and capital to invest in buying entire coastal areas, starting to build these skyscrapers where it's only luxury apartments that no Cypriot could ever afford. Um, so you had this issue beforehand, and because Cyprus also had, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, we had a golden passport scandal, which is basically our government giving away, so selling off European passports to even criminals, Ukrainian and Russian criminals as well, um, who would invest a certain number, a certain amount on the island, usually through property. So if you gave them like 1.5 million or 2 million euros in a property investment, then you would be given citizenship in Cyprus. And in many instances, there were people who were convicted of war crimes who were given European passports from Cyprus.
Wow.
Uh,
But it's also it's like jeopardizing security in Europe. It's like two countries are just
yeah,
giving away passport to rich criminals, and then the rest of us are like we're supposed to care about a few illegal immigrants, um,
yeah.
like
I mean,
that have
that's the
no
thing.
power. No, you're going
They
to
make
give it to
art.
rich, powerful immigrants instead. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they basically try and instigate hate for people seeking safety on boats coming to the island, who end up living in extremely poor neighborhoods with very like a lot of the times it's maybe even 8, 10 people living in a two-bedroom apartment. Um, they're pushed to those living conditions, and they try to instigate hate for those groups instead of the um, ultra rich buying up all of the land on the island and building this infrastructure that Cypriots won't even be able to access at the end of the day because they're not in that uh, class. And this has basically shifted since the um, illegal invasion of Russia and Ukraine, and the Europe's push for anything and everything anti-Russia in terms of sanctioning Russia and everything. Since then, we've had this shift from Russian foreign investment and Ukrainian to Israeli. And that shift is becoming even more apparent since the genocide, also because Israel and Israelis kind of view Cyprus as a very practical location for them. It's simply a 35, 45-minute flight to Cyprus, and a lot of them have property in Cyprus and in Israel, and they go back and forth. Or some people open businesses. And since 2017, you have the government increasing military collaborations with Israel, which has caused just a whole bunch of problems.
Like which problems, for example?
Well, apart from the fact that we're interacting with an
Yeah.
army, a military entity that is enacting apartheid and oppression for how many years of the Palestinian people is already problematic. But the training exercises that they were doing are also very problematic since the beginning, because in 2017, for example, and later on, they've been doing training exercises in the Rhodos Mountains, the IOF with Cypriot soldiers to
Wait.
basically
th-
reenact in the invasion of southern Lebanon.
And this is the same region as there's a British outpost as well. It's in the mountains. Yeah. So
Yes,
it's
the Rhodos.
probably they're all fine doing that there. The British, I mean.
I mean, yeah, I mean, the British share the intelligence openly with Israel, pretty much for a while now. So I'm as, it was just a training exercise. But the fact that they were simulating an invasion into southern Lebanon, because the geographical terrain is similar in the mountains
Hmm.
there, is extremely problematic because our National Guard is supposed to be purely defensive.
Hmm.
We're a small island. We're occupied as well.
Hmm.
So what is pushed by army officials themselves is that we are a purely defensive force. But everything that we've seen so far in terms of our collaborations with Israel is slowly building the offensive approach
Hmm.
to the idea of security. And this is, there were also reports from Israeli media in March 2024. So this was during the genocide
Hmm.
of training exercises that the IOF did with the Cypriot National Guard and also I think the US, where they simulated attacks on Iranian soil. This was, stated by Israeli media. The Cypriot media tried to deny this, um, but the fact that you have them stating it themselves, like, yeah, we're simulating attacks in Iran, and you're involved in it. So it's very problematic that all of a sudden Cyprus is getting much more involved than we ever should have been. Um, and
And you have
even
no control
recently,
over it. That's
yeah, no control whatsoever.
like they
Hassan
just don't
Nasrallah,
care.
the previous leader of Hezbollah in Lebanon, threatened Cyprus. Now, it's interesting because a lot of people assumed that the threat was mainly directed towards the British bases, which were actively being used to support Israel. But the fact that he they didn't specify and they only mentioned Cyprus as a whole, I think goes to show about the significance of what these defense cooperations with the US and with Israel is doing to Cyprus's image in the region.
Yeah, definitely.
Netanyahu is always trying to get Cyprus involved in some capacity. For example, the Amalthea maritime corridor that they built
Can
that
you
was
explain
connected to the
maybe
US.
for the people who don't know
Yeah,
the corridor?
yeah, of course. So the Amalthea maritime humanitarian corridor was basically proposed by our government, but with the approval of Netanyahu. And this was when the siege on Gaza was really starting to escalate, and no humanitarian aid was being let in through the land crossings. And so, as a nice political cover, Cyprus had this initiative to send aid from the sea, from Cyprus to Gaza. Now, this also worked in collaboration with the US built pier that they had constructed at the time that costed hundreds of millions, was only able to run for like barely a week or something before it completely broke down, which was also involved in the Nusrat massacre that killed over 270 Palestinians to rescue four Israeli captives. It's insane because looking at the reporting online, there is a lot of talk about the involvement of the US and in that operation. But what people don't point out is that that Amalthea maritime corridor was most likely used to aid that operation. Al Jazeera had reporting video evidence of these civilian trucks, either looking like humanitarian trucks, passing by um, the streets close to the Nusrat refugee camp, accompanied by Israeli tanks and military vehicles. So there was video evidence of that. There was witnesses, several witnesses that claimed that these trucks, these civilian-looking trucks, came from the U.S.-built pier into the Nusrat refugee camp, and they were escorted by Israeli occupation forces, which were then used to conduct this slaughter of
Hmm.
Palestinians. Now, that pier is connected to Cyprus. I mean, we have a screenshot, for example, now of the vessel tracking data. of a US warship leaving from Larnaca, and it reaches off the coast of Gaza just the day before the Nusrat massacre. So it was connected in that way. So whatever was being transported on that pier came from Cyprus, including this truck that was most likely involved in the Nusrat massacre. There was no one making this link between, Cyprus basically acting as a channel for Israel and the US to do whatever they want. And also, let's be clear that the amount of aid that can be sent, that was sent, was barely anything to feed the population that was starving. Now, any aid is good. Even the global Sumud flotilla, the aim of the flotilla was to break the siege through a people-led maritime corridor.
Mm,
But this initiative was under full Israeli control. So
mm.
there were Israeli personnel stationed in Cyprus, checking all the goods. They were in charge of what was allowed, what wasn't, and so we're just abdicating our own sovereignty.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, we even had other instances of Israeli personnel conducting security checks at our airports,
So, sorry,
because we
what?
have Mossad. Yeah, so we had Israeli personnel basically checking the Larnaca airports and the Paphos airports because they collaborate heavily. Mossad is quite integrated into the security infrastructure. Just to give you an example, there is a main synagogue in Larnaca that a lot of the Israeli community goes to, and it's heavily surveilled. So there's a whole bunch of cameras, and they have a permanently stationed Cypriot police vehicle outside of the synagogue, also with extra cameras on it. Recently, there was a journalist slash lawyer called Dimitri Laskaris that I know, and he came to Cyprus to do reporting on the influx of Israelis to Cyprus. He visited that synagogue, um, and he was taking some footage to do some reporting. And afterwards, at the airport, he was questioned at the passport gate by the criminal investigation department about the purpose of his visit to the synagogue in Larnaca. So, yeah, basically, the Republic of Cyprus at this point has just given free rein to Israeli personnel to just control anything that has to do with the security infrastructure of the island, whether that's from the ports to the airports and even military bases, which they have very close connections with.
It's crazy. It's kind of mind blowing the amount of collaboration here, and also
Oh
how
yeah,
it's essentially almost functioning like Palestine is, like where the not really like Palestine, but like it's different, like the situation is completely different, but like it is really functioning like an occupation, even though you're not officially occupied by Israel. Like
yeah.
like it's crazy for me to think that that Belgian police or Belgian secret service, we do have a secret service. They're not very good, but I don't know. Maybe they are.
I mean, kind of like the Cypriot, kind of like the Cypriot authorities. It's
Yeah,
not
and they're
very good.
also
So,
collaborators with the US intelligence apparatus and the British intelligence apparatus and Israeli. So you cannot trust any of them. But like, I cannot imagine them doing checks in Cyprus for any reason. There's
yeah,
literally no reason why my country would be managing a border check, because that's what it is. An airport check is a border check. Like, how
yeah.
am I like? How would I go police a border in Peru? How would I go police a border in the UK? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, so in that specific instance, it was Cypriot personnel who were questioning him about his visit,
Uh,
but the airport itself does have a lot of Israeli personnel stationed there. Yeah, I mean it's very problematic how embedded they are into our security infrastructure, military, police. Just recently, when there was when the Sumut flotilla was intercepted, and there was kind of like a protest happening across the world. We also had a protest in Cyprus, and it was one of the rare instances of police violence and police brutality in Cyprus at these pro-Palestinian protests. It was it's not unheard of. There are other occurrences and general police issues,
Hmm.
but in terms of violent acts, it was one of the very few instances of extremely violent acts. In terms, they were throwing people, they hit a few people as well.
Hmm.
They sprayed some sort of chemical, so a pepper spray that burned people's eyes, like on women and children, and it was very bad. And the interesting thing that a lot of people at the protest noted was they were speaking to these, you know, security forces, whoever they were, in Greek, and they wouldn't answer, or they would answer in English. And
Ah,
that
why?
is, I mean, it's extremely suspicious because in Cyprus, I mean, all, police in Cyprus are Cypriot or they're Greek.
That's what you
And
want from your local police, right? That they are from your
yeah,
town, so they
and
see you
like
as neighbors.
a lot of them might know Turkish as well
Yeah,
because of the
yeah.
national language as well because of the Turkish Cypriot community. So the fact that they wouldn't know any Greek is like, who are you? What are you doing here,
Did
policing me? But it was strange because there were there were certain left-wing figures there who, I mean, there was even a previous minister there at the protests who were attacked and pushed back. And it's a thing where a lot of the times the police, when the main opposition party, Agel, is involved, they don't they don't turn that violent. Like they'd rather not have the opposition party kind of cause
using
more
it.
issues
Yeah.
down the line. They if they kind of instigate things at one of their protests. But the fact that they just completely disregarded that and just started attacking everyone from politicians to journalists to the public was it was kind of insane.
Yeah, that's insane. And it's like here in Brussels, the same day, we also experienced a lot of police violence. And yeah, it was terrible. Like the organizers, so the two heads of the global movement to Gaza, Belgium, were actually attacked by police after the protest while they were on their way home, just having their keffiyehs on. So they were, a cop car actually stopped their car, and one of like she like one of them, she broke her finger, so he pushed her down like this, and she broke her finger, and then the other one has a head wound from the encounter. And that's just two people. That was after the protest. That's not even going into everything that happened during the protest.
Fortunately, we hadn't had a lot of violence in pro-Palestinian protests. I remember another instance in Limassol quite a while ago where there was this undercover cop. So it's a cop in civilian clothes, essentially, um, who he was the one who was instigating a lot of issues, trying to demand like who's the organizer and bring them here and causing issues. And then basically at some point that escalated somehow into about 12, 14 cops trying to arrest this one elderly man, like over 60-year-old man, um, because he was resisting arrest. Or so they had him tied, handcuffed for a bit, and because we were protesting right in front of them for quite some time, chanting, they eventually released him. But since then, there hasn't been that much police violence in these protests. It's mainly been just causing issues about you're not allowed to cross by this road, or you need to kind of like end things faster than was programmed. So it's mainly causing a lot of inconveniences in protesters' activities.
It's a little bit of
There was a
administrative
more
sabotage mostly.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, kind of. Even more recently, they voted for a bill that would basically you would require to submit
a
a
request.
request to protest at least a week in advance, unless it's an urgent protest with a certain number of people. But it's a thing where it can't really be enforced, and we just pushed back against that by having the protest announcements released by everyone simultaneously, and then no one giving any questions to the police if they asked. And we would just show up for the protest, and we just make it difficult for them to actually implement this new law as to, who's
But
the organizer, what,
it is
all of
a
it.
law already.
It's not a law.
Ah.
That's the thing. It's not a law because the the rules need to be discussed and agreed upon in Parliament. So the bill passed to, to like formally have to request for for a permit to protest, but the logistics haven't been planned out yet, and we're basically protesting in the sense that we do not need this law, and this law is actually, reduces our rights to protest and of freedom of speech. So this is our way of protesting against that bill as well.
Mhm.
Um, but there was another instance of police brutality and police violence, and some people were arrested in an anti-police violence protest. Because, yeah, ironic.
Yeah.
Because that was, yeah, it
But
was a
that
protest
ironic,
because
but
there was,
also very classic police
yeah,
violence. If you
exactly.
mention anything about them, if you're any critique, they will counteract. They will take vengeance somehow. So
Exactly. But this was also a protest which was quite significant because the police had raided an apartment building with a lot of refugees and migrants, and to basically crack down on illegal uh, migration.
mhm.
And that basically um, escalated into a young boy falling off the balcony and dying during that operation. So the protest was against police violence in that instance, and
Mhm.
they also chose that date to uh, physically hurt and arrest other people. Um, so yeah, it was first protesting uh, in the streets, and then we moved protesting outside the police station until the people were released.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, but just because that's the thing, Cypriot police are also have a lazy nature, much like the Cypriot Authority, much like the government, much like the military. It's
Is that an advantage
honestly,
or?
if they weren't that late, it's an advantage because if they weren't that lazy, they would probably be more violent. So we have to be grateful for their laziness in that sense.
Finally, some good news. We've seen over the past year, or over the past 2 years, that the police violence is, it's not Berlin proportions yet, let's say, or US proportions maybe, but there's, I can literally see
Getting
the escalation.
Yeah, I mean, it's just to provoke you. I mean, a lot of stuff for us, we've had instances where people switch to a bit more anti-police chants.
Hmm.
Um, and the funny thing is that from their expression, which is like completely blank, faceless, when we talk about dead children, um, massacred Palestinians, just completely blank. But once we mention anything that has to do with anti-police, they immediately take it extremely personally, and they're like, "Oh, not everyone is like this. It's
We're here to
there are good
protect.
cops as well." Yeah, and it's for me that's shocking. Like that's what bothers you. Like
Hmm.
we're talking about at least tens of thousands of people that have been slaughtered, and you are part of the system that's working with the people that are doing that, but your problem is an uh, a chant against cops. Or it's That's what honestly bothers me more, is the fact that what bothers them is that instead of everything else
Yeah,
going
they're
on.
literally bothered
um
with children at protests somehow. Like
yeah, instead of the children that are
they've
being
listened to
burned
our
alive
speeches for
by
two
people they're
years.
collaborating.
Yeah, they listened to our speeches for 2 years, and then they're worried about, like, oh no, I
Yeah.
have to control myself because there's a child around. Oh, I cannot beat them up this hard. Oh no. Like my Israeli training. What does my Israeli training book
Yeah,
say?
how can I put it to good use?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm not sure if you know, but like recently there was a week-long seminar by the IOF to basically give the lessons learned during the genocide to a whole bunch of other countries, including Cyprus. Um, so
Really?
that was, yeah, that was something which, I mean, it's disgusting, essentially, the fact that we had army personnel that have taken part in this seminar to take lessons from these
And where did
people
they
that have.
organize it? In Israel.
I I'm not sure because it seems to be an international. It might have been online, but the
Hmm.
thing is, that this was initially announced by the um, Israeli ambassador to Greece. So the countries that took place were the U.S., Canada, UK, Germany, Finland, India, Greece, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Austria, Estonia, Japan, Morocco, Romania, Serbia, and Slovakia. So all of these countries apparently had their army personnel get lessons from the IOF. And what they learned during that time, well, we can only assume, and it's not going to be good.
No, and you really do see it when you watch a lot of footage of different corps around the world. You do see the similarities. I notice when I go to protests in different countries, it is really a completely different experience. We have different angles. Some of us are very radical, some of us are very careful. So, yeah, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Cyprus does have quite, especially now, I would say, since the genocide, Cyprus does have a growing activist base. There have been, for years, groups that have been involved in protests locally, also in the support of the Palestinian cause more generally, but about the local issues as well.
Hmm.
Um, but especially since October 7th, there's just been much more a grassroots mobilization from people in a lot of different cities in on the island. So there's definitely been a growth in the activist community um, and groups. The issue is just with Cyprus because it's also dealing with its own occupation and own internal issues with the Cyprus problem. The difficulty that activists face is basically trying to make them understand that a lot of the local issues that we have has to also do with these colonial interests
Hmm.
that play in the island, including the ties with Israel. So again, like the people who have been convinced because of the empathy for Palestinians and are more or less already joining the protests. There are a lot of people who have joined pro-Palestinian protest. Whether they do it consistently, that's a bit more difficult because it's a small island. People are kind of highly pressured in their life, and it's difficult to mobilize, for example, like weekly actions. So they've been more spaced out.
Hmm.
But if you do speak to the community generally, they are very much pro-Palestinian. But it's whether they can materially understand why collaborating with Israel, for example, to protect us from the so-called Turkish threat, is actually a problem for you as well, not just for Palestinians. Um, Obviously, we always center Palestine because that's what we need to focus on: ending the genocide, ending the siege, ending the apartheid, and making sure that Palestinians have a state that represents them in whatever capacity that they decide themselves as a people. Um, but yeah, to mobilize the people who aren't aware of the historical context of a lot of the problematic things with what the government is pushing, you need to kind of bring it to their attention in what they can materially feel in their life. So one with the Zionist influx, it's exacerbating the cost of living crisis and the housing crisis
Hmm.
that we're seeing. Um, I mean, we've had recently a lot of different ways that the the Israeli embassy, and the Zionist community and the Zionist lobby is trying to push their propaganda. Recently, they tried to hold an event at a primary school, so with underage kids, to um, promote a new green roof garden in one of the public schools, which they advertise it as the first, even though it wasn't the first. But this was in collaboration with the Ministry
Wait,
of
the first
Education.
green roof in Cyprus, or?
So they promoted it as the first green roof, even though it wasn't. There was another school at least that
Uh,
had green roof, but they did it to show, for to advertise it, and they were going to celebrate the Israeli Independence Day um,
Hmm.
through with the primary school. So that was happening in collaboration with the Israeli embassy. Sorry, the Israeli embassy in Cyprus, along with the um, education minister in Cyprus. There was a huge backlash from also the teachers union, and so thankfully they cancelled the event at the primary school. They rescheduled it to a later date for a private event. But
Hmm.
initially, these underage kids were going to be fully checked, like through scans, police dogs, bag checks, just to celebrate, Israeli independence, which is,
Not really
revolting
independence
at
at
this.
all.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and especially during the genocide, to openly collaborate with the embassy um, in public schools is insane.
Hmm.
And even more recently, the Zionist lobby in Cyprus, in Larnaca specifically, um, basically submitted a request to the Larnaca municipality to plant trees along opposite another school, the high school in Cyprus. Um, and their plan was to plant 48 trees for the number of Israeli hostages that Trump so
Oh my
released.
God!
So
Like,
basically,
why don't you stop
yeah,
burning olive trees in Palestine? Why don't you start with that?
exactly. Yeah. So that's the thing. The way that they advertised it on social media was literally to tribute Trump by planting those trees for the ceasefire. And they hid this fact, the political nature of the event, from the municipality. So then they openly stated that they did not mention this in their permit request and that they're not letting them put any signs or anything. And that action happened. They planted those trees, and there were protesters outside because they were gated around with Cypriot and US flags around, which was just disturbing.
Why
The
U.S.
Israeli
U.S.
ambassador
flags as
was
well?
there. Yes, because it was a tribute to Trump.
Ah, yeah, of course. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry, they're
insane.
they're they're strategic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's just one example of how a deep kind of embedment into the Cypriot community, because even recently there was an AI weapons conference in Nicosia under the auspices of the Ministry of Defense, and one of the main sponsors was Rafael, the Israeli military
Manufacturing.
company
Yeah.
that manufactures drones and other equipment that have been actively used in the genocide in Gaza and the oppression of Palestinians as a whole. And not only that, they were the first speakers right after the president of the Republic of Cyprus and the Ministry of Defense made their opening speeches. So they were the first topic, and their topic was about the Spike family to basically increase, I think, survivability and lethality. So how, Cyprus, which apparently were a defensive force, is openly inviting, is sponsored by these criminal companies, and even has topics of conversation that has to do with lethality, is pretty contradictory for claiming to be a defensive um, National Guard. So, the complicity of the government runs really deep. I mean, we've had our president visit Netanyahu several times. Once, even right after there were attacks on Israel from Yemen, a few hours later, our president was in Israel greeting Netanyahu, war criminal Netanyahu, calling him a dear friend.
Nice.
So that's just the level of yeah, complicity that our government has, unfortunately.
I'm wondering. Let's say that Netanyahu is not welcome anywhere. Imagine Mamdani in New York, actually being serious about, like, we might never see Netanyahu make a bullshit speech at the UN again. Um, but Like I was
Hopefully. Well,
wondering.
hopefully behind bars.
Hmm?
Hopefully we'll see him behind bars.
Hopefully,
Like,
yes. But that's what I'm wondering is like at some point people are going to close their borders for Netanyahu. Actually, do what they should do and respect the ICC warrants. So I'm wondering what happens if all these countries are starting to put sanctions, like, and actually progress, which is inevitable in the end. It might take too long, but it will happen at some point, um, hopefully. Then I'm wondering, like, if I'm Netanyahu, where would I go? And then, like last time when Iran retaliated for the Israeli attacks on their soil, he ran to Greece, right? But
yeah.
maybe, like, I'm wondering, it's like, will he go to, like, because if Europe is off limits, then is Cyprus an option, or would that be tricky with the Turkish? Like,
I mean, look, if the government would be willing to accommodate him, our president has kind of made that clear. Now, whether he would actually be invited to the island, I'm not sure because there was quite a few people who would have opposition with that. Um, I mean, there's even more center parties who their line of thinking is, oh, it's Netanyahu is the problematic one. It's not the entire Israeli
yeah, sure.
government. It's just Netanyahu. So if they replace him, it should be, um, fine.
Mm-hmm.
So unfortunately, but I think it would be difficult for them to openly bring him to Cyprus. Not impossible. I, they could if they wanted to, because we've seen plenty of reasons to show us that they would be willing to go that far to
Mm-hmm.
protect this disgusting war criminal. Um, but hopefully, we will never see that happen. Because if he does show up, then there's definitely going to be a huge mobilization from a lot of people on the island.
Yeah, I will definitely come over. Like, we'll just flood Cyprus from all over Europe to get him. No, but okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I wanted to hear your thoughts on that because it's something I've been thinking about ever since he ran to Greece like a coward. Like, he cannot even stand with his own country. Uh, it's crazy to me that, like, I would never leave my country if I was running this country, and if I just threw a bomb on another country, like, it's kind of crazy that like how low you can actually go even within the Zionist ideology. And then,
Oh yeah,
yeah, of course, the central parties making everything about Netanyahu is a classic attempt by the liberal Zionists to make it about him so that they can continue their project in the Middle East. But honestly, I would like them to just go back and never come back. Because, like, obviously, like, what I wanted to know, for example, like, do you have, like, are there specific hotels or companies? Because, like, I'm thinking of, like, your average Belgian when they book their vacation, they're completely unaware. Like, even if you kind of vaguely know that Airbnb might have apartments in the occupied territories, they still don't have, like, it's difficult to find an alternative one from Airbnb. But
mm,
second, if you then go to a hotel, you might end up at an Israeli hotel chain or some form of Israeli, company. So I was wondering, like, what should we avoid, or where are the Israelis mostly at, and uh, how can we support actual Cypriots instead of these colonizers?
yeah. I mean, it's a big issue. I mean, Israelis especially have taken a lot of interest in the coastal cities like Ayia Napa, Badara, Limassol, Bafos, Larnaca. And so you have huge companies like the Fatal Group, for example,
Mm.
that have millions in property and hotels and are even recently expanding into more resorts, more hotels. Um, I mean, there's even a basically like a Zionist retreat in Bafos where it's like full Israeli. So many Israelis are basically, it's kind of like a mini resort in Paphos in the woods. Um, that everything's in Hebrew and in English. There's like no indication as if you're in Cyprus, no Greek, no Turkish, nothing. Um,
And when they have their own little
and
economy, or
I mean, not economy. Well, in a
no? But I
sense,
mean
they do because
like an actual Hebrew store, Hebrew
oh
school,
yeah, I mean, look,
Hebrew.
there are a lot of Israeli run businesses,
Yeah,
and especially some which are more catered towards Israelis. Um, Now, again, you can go there and book yourself a room or whatever,
yeah,
but it's on their website they openly promote Zionism and everything. The main website is in Hebrew, for
yeah.
example. So they do have a huge presence on the island. I mean, they're building gated communities as well. So
Yeah, that's what I was wondering
it's
what you said there, because that sounds a lot like a colonial outpost, or like any other country. I
yeah.
wouldn't even think so much about it, right? If tomorrow you tell me that there's Romanians that have their little Romanian resort, I wouldn't care, right? Because I wouldn't expect the Romanians to do anything with it. But if you know that Israel is already involved in your military, uh, when they're doing this in many cities, so like the gated communities is a scary notion, no? How are they even allowed to do that? How many of these gated communities do you think there are?
Well, it's difficult to say because there are a lot of Israelis with dual nationalities, and a lot of the statistics that you
Mm,
see that, so many Israeli purchased these properties in Cyprus, they're not entirely accurate because sometimes they buy them under a different nationality.
mhm.
Um, but there's definitely a very large community in Larnaca, in Bafos. In Limassol, they're just, I've spoken with a lot of people who they have their family residence, and Israeli investors bought out the entire neighborhood, and they're pressuring them as well to sell their house, for example, so they can build a gated community, close off an entire section. Um, so this is kind of the way they act. It's kind of like we're selling off our land so Israelis can build settlements here. Um, Now, again, there were different um, communities as well during the time that there were Russian Ukrainian investors as well, because they would invest in certain property and it would be more exclusive. But that was mainly in terms of class, not in terms of religion or ethnicity. Well, here there's a very stark difference between the type of communities that's being built by the Israeli influx in Cyprus, because they're
I've,
gated, they're heavily surveilled, and they're protected by the local police as well, under the guise of protecting the Jewish community. Um, so there is stark differences in what we refer to as gated communities. It's not just a fact of like investment and it's a class community.
mhm.
It's becoming ethnic community separation.
Yeah, 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 it's secretive, and also what I always find strange about this thing with protecting the Jews or whatever, they do the same here in Brussels, and also there's historically there have been a lot of false flag attacks around Israeli embassies to justify the police presence and surveillance on these embassies. So, but like as a Cypriot or as a Belgian, I get really bothered by that because it's like I'm paying a lot for the police, but what does the police do? They kick my ass. Well, not me specifically. And at the same time, I'm paying for my police to protect Zionists that happen to like I'm saying like okay the synagogues, but yeah, like the only reason they're doing that is because of the Zionists. Also, who gives a shit
Exactly.
about your? I'm not going to go around attacking. Uh, or nobody's going to go
Exactly. It's
around
a pretext.
attacking these religious houses if you don't instigate it yourself or do it yourself. You know, like it's not really something that is so common or whatever. And if it is that common, it's mostly because of false flags, and there's so many proofs of that happening. I think the last time I heard about it was in the UK or in Australia. Um, but yeah, it's really catastrophic, and it's like you're a few steps away from being in a West Bank type of situation, depending on the complicity of your own government. Um, because yeah, like even
Yeah,
at your protest, they were kicking your ass. Like the activist ass, the actual Cypriots standing up for Palestinians, they were kicking their ass, but then at the same time they protect the Israelis that are there. It's so completely backwards and unfair. Um, I wanted to
exactly.
maybe, um, because obviously I know that you might have to run, but I we didn't really
I'm
discuss
gonna
a.
have to go in about 10-ish minutes.
That's
Sorry
perfect.
for the.
No, 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 that's okay. There's just so much to unpack here. Maybe I would just wanted to finish with the UK base itself and their role during the global movement, because we had talked about this before, I think. During the actual Global Smooth Flotilla, there was a lot of military activity, and I know from your work with GFC that like you've been like you and other activists have been tracking planes, have been tracking boats to see the activity in the region. So can you maybe very shortly discuss a little bit?
Yeah, so are you referring to the specific instance of the Sumud mission as it was going through the Mediterranean?
Yeah, the spy flights, the like the stuff going on behind the scenes, and maybe just in general what the British are using Cyprus for, because we really haven't gone too deep into that.
Yeah. So, well, during the mission of the flotilla to break the siege on Gaza, unfortunately, you can't see a lot of available flight tracking information on the drones that were actively used to suppress the mission. But what you can see is different military aircrafts, either belonging to the US or Israel, which are travel close to the region where the ships were either expected to come or um, were actually directly above them during the time or shortly before any attacks occurred. So, an example would be there was an Israeli surveillance aircraft that traveled toward to Malta about uh, I think a few days to a week before the attacks in Tunisia that happened. And around the same time, there was also another US military plane going to Catania. Um, from there, you can infer that they might have stationed either personnel or they were doing general surveillance of the region, expecting the boats to come eventually. So you don't know how that intelligence or what the purpose of those trips are. Another example would be when the attacks happened off the coast of Crete. There was a U.S. surveillance aircraft that was spotted in the region um, close to the time of the attacks. Now, they're most likely not involved in the attacks themselves, but definitely could have provided some sort of intelligence for the attacks to happen. At the same time, as well, during those hours, you had another US military transport plane covertly landing at Paphos International Airport in Cyprus. Again, there they tried hiding flight radar. It reappeared hours later, increasing in altitude, so it likely landed at the airport. And because there's a lot of military infrastructure close by there, and it's quite a close distance to Crete, there's there is a probability that these bases and these assets were used in some capacity to aid Israel's attacks on the flotilla.
Mhm.
So there is a lot that you can kind of see in terms of different flight paths and these aircrafts that are very active in the region. In terms of the Sumud, it's a bit more difficult to find on the flight tracking websites because it has to do with usually smaller drones, which are
Mhm.
completely hidden,
Yeah, yeah.
and we don't have access to indicating where they are.
That would be great,
But in
though.
but there, yeah, I mean there were some instances where, for example, with the I think it was the Madeleine that sailed because we also worked part of that as the drone watch part of the drone
Yeah.
watch group. We were able to confirm with people in the group after pressuring the Greek Coast Guard and they confirmed that it was their drones surveilling them at the time, which initially we saw on flight radar. So there are instances where you can kind of get useful information from them, but there are other times where you just have to infer a lot of things. Um, Now, yeah,
Yeah.
Cyprus in general, in terms of how it's been used, is very problematic. One has been from the British bases, from RAF Aphrodite. There have been over 600 surveillance operations over Gaza, and UK officials have told the Times recently, a source from the Times basically confirmed that live intelligence was being shared with Israel as these spy flights were going on. So we're talking about thousands of hours of footage and live intelligence being shared with Israel since December 2023, and all of this happening from Cyprus. Now, this intelligence they claim is for hostage rescue operation only, but once they share it to Israel, Israel can do whatever it wants with it. And these aircrafts have target acquisition capabilities. They can collect intelligence on to basically help in targeting attacks.
Mhm.
So it's already deeply problematic that the bases are doing that by itself, as well as military transport planes going to and from the bases, both US and UK. But you also have an integration of Cypriot infrastructure into this, into these operations.
Yeah.
So we have multiple cases of military transport planes, especially US planes, going from like Paphos or Larnaca airport to Israel. One of the spy flights that left Aphrodite and went over Gaza afterwards landed in Paphos airport, which is Cypriot controlled for no reason whatsoever, before making its way back to the base. So it just kind of gives you an indication that they have an open door policy for
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
US and the UK to just do whatever they want. Um, there, we have flight radar of Israeli surveillance aircrafts coming towards Cyprus, kind of going in our airspace and then going back, or Israeli refueling aircraft as well. Um, using Cyprus as like a detour for um, any reason. I mean, they might have things stationed there, which that they just keep hidden, or they might, especially that instance where there was a refueling aircraft, Israeli refueling aircraft over Cyprus. Um, the there was an attack on the Tower 22 US base in Jordan,
Mhm.
and Israel was also facing several attacks from different factions. So um, it is likely that that aircraft kind of took a detour around Cyprus to kind of protect itself from any attacks that might have been coming. So yeah, it's mainly the integration of the entire, all parts of the island into Israel's complicity into the genocide and the oppression of Palestinians, but also in Lebanon, in Yemen. These bases have been used to um, intercept attacks against Israel and have been used to also bomb Yemen, which the UK government confirmed as well.
Yeah.
So it's Cyprus has become this literal launch pad for NATO forces to conduct whatever type of operation they want,
And
with the governments, with their full complicity.
yeah, the picture that you painted tonight is quite grim. I'm not saying it's the end of the world, but like it's hard to imagine really a way out. Uh, because you don't have the advantage that you have a huge domestic population that could actually counter. You are with a divided government, a divided people. Where do you see, just to finish the conversation, I also really want to thank you already for making the time. This was so interesting. And I hope maybe we can catch up sometime to give an update and
Yeah,
maybe also talk about Cyprus as a border country for Europe, because that's also very interesting and very bad. But yeah, like just some what can we learn? What is the way out? What makes you optimistic?
yeah, yeah. So thank you again for having me. It's been great discussing things with you. I think Cyprus is starting to get quite a lot of international attention. for the wrong reasons, but it works for us because the more pressure that there is on what's happening in Cyprus from around the world helps also build our movement on the ground to pressure our government,
Hmm.
to hold them accountable. So that definitely helps the movement grow. But I think it's also a matter of um, the fact that this global movement for Palestine has basically just revealed our own internal problems that we have to deal with, and it mirrors the problems in our society. So I think this has helped mobilize a lot of people and escape the nihilistic thinking that a lot of people have had for a long time now, which was that even if we protest, it won't change anything. Well, now we've kind of proven that if there is a global solidarity movement, change can be made. And I try to think of it from a different perspective. Every time either our government or the EU try to do anything against us, so whether that's implementing new restrictions on protests or stuff like that, we need to go even harder and it should motivate us even more. It's because we should think of it that they're worried that we're on the verge of succeeding. So they're throwing everything they can at us to make sure that they discourage us. So
Hmm.
I try to see that as a sign of, even more of a reason why we need to mobilize more people because we see the cracks in in their story. If they really felt secure about what they were doing, they would just ignore us and
Oh yeah.
they wouldn't pay no attention to us. So the fact that they have to give us some sort of attention um, goes to show that there is hope to actually make change.
Yeah, I think that's a really good takeaway. I completely agree. The more they try to fight us, the more they kind of prove that, like, why are you creating anti-protest laws if protesting doesn't work? Well, thank you so much. Maybe just where can people find you? Is there something you would like to promote, or if you can recommend some reading on Cyprus, good Cyprus sources?
Yeah, well, you can find us on our social media, Genocide Free Cyprus.
Hmm.
So we have Instagram, we have Facebook, Upscrolled, and hopefully soon on YouTube as well. But also, in terms to learn more about Cyprus, Declassified UK does a lot of really good investigative work on the role of the British bases.
Oh yeah.
And through our own social media, we do our own reporting on what's happening in Cyprus locally and internationally. So definitely check that out and feel free to message the page and get in contact with us.
Okay.